Hello, my name is Dr. Jon Anderson, and this case study is about studentification. So many people watching this video will be considering going to university, and one of the key questions you ask when you've chosen where you're going is where you're going to live. In the first year, people often live in student halls, but in second and third year they tend to want to live in the city themselves, and this is where studentification becomes an issue. Students often want to cluster together, living in the same areas of the city, often close to a university, with all the amenities and recreational facilities and housing stock that suits their lifestyles. And studentification arises when there's a clustering effect, where lots of students live in particular areas and change the very nature of those places, change the very nature of those geographies as a consequence of their occupation in those areas of the city. And this is what this case study has investigated. Okay, so in terms of researching studentification, this was researched actually by lots of students themselves during their research methodologies class. They went around the areas in the city where a lot of students lived in. So first of all, they identified the particular geographies of the city where students clustered. Then they identified key stakeholders, for example, letting agencies or landlords or local shopkeepers or residents of that area, be they students or other members of the public, and invited them to discuss what sort of effects they thought that having a high amount of students in this area of the city had for those neighbourhoods. Well, what the students found was that there were particular repercussions for having high clusters of students in particular areas of the city, and these could be understood in terms of the social and cultural effects, in terms of the more physical effects of those areas of the city, and in terms of environmental effects. So in terms of environmental effects, there might be noise pollution, there might be physical pollution in terms of students tend to put their bins out on the wrong days or just put their bags out on the streets. And it makes the place look untidy because students necessarily aren't living in that area of the city for their whole lives, simply for a couple of terms in any one academic year. They don't necessarily have the same attachments to those localities and that same commitment to the upkeep of that locality. And so it's found that in areas of studentification, the built form tends to erode, and there's high degrees of environmental pollution. In terms of that built form, because a lot of the properties change from being owner-occupier in terms of and into rental accommodations, perhaps the landlords don't invest in those properties. They don't invest in updating the windows or updating the facades of those buildings. And so it tends to be that those buildings aren't looked after in the same way that owner-occupier buildings would be looked after. And so these areas of the city tend to decrease the quality of their building stock. In terms of more social and cultural events or consequences of areas of studentification, this can be seen both positively and negatively. There's a high degree of sandwich shops and lunchtime shops, of pubs and perhaps even nightclubs in highly studentified areas of the city, because these are the sorts of amenities that students want. However, if you're an owner-occupier, perhaps a young professional or someone with a family living in those areas, you don't want people at 2 o'clock in the morning coming back from the pub, or you don't want 24/7 open convenience stores because it disrupts your own lifestyle. So you have tensions within these areas of the city between existing occupants and students. Well, in terms of this research project, what it prompted, if you like, was some questions that I think everyone can ask in relation to studentified areas of the city. For example, should there be policies to stop areas having high intensities of students within them? Or is it a good thing to almost have a student ghetto, an area of the city that's just for students, and therefore other members of the public should live in other areas of the city, and therefore you almost border out these issues. This area of the city is for one group of people with their lifestyles and issues, and other areas of the city are for other types of people. It's worthwhile when you consider these issues, and perhaps students themselves, when they're thinking about this area of their own study, think what would they do in order to tackle some of the consequences of studentification, or indeed decide where people could live in a city.